Let's dive into some of the transaction types. I know we talked about this leading up to our call. What are maybe let's dive into 4 or 5 of the different type of transaction types, talk about some pros and cons to each, some challenges that we might face with each. I think the first one we had large asset sales, non-core, non-op, mineral divestitures, farm out transactions, and then we had a divestiture, midstream components, and water assets. We talked a little bit about the midstream side of things. What about what are some things that some challenges, Austin, that you would try to navigate clients through on the large asset transaction side of things?
Well, one of the challenges that's been out there for a while is the activist FTC that we have, as far as really hammering down on antitrust issues in HSR. Not sure how that probably going to change a little bit in the new administration. Probably a little bit more friendlier to the M&A environment. So we'll see, but hopefully that's the case. But I mean, I think that with these you've seen. Like for instance, Oventive recently, they acquired some Montney shale assets up in Canada, and at the same time, divested Uinta Basin assets. So these big deals are happening, and sometimes it's selling off conventional assets in a large package and keeping things around it. That's that gets a little bit tougher if you're not doing a full exit from a basin. Because you have to bifurcate things like microgrids or water assets or midstream systems. You have to make sure that you can continue to operate what you keep in that basin. But all of these things are asset level issues: consents, pref rights, contracts that have different elements, like we were talking about, that need to be separated if they don't provide for that. So that whole litany comes in on either of these deals. I think that you also have some basin specific issues, whether that be, in Uinta, you've got BIA leases all over the place. You have state leases in New Mexico. You have, a little bit less regulatory, so to speak, risk in Texas. It's a little bit easier to do things, but you got the BLM. So, you can, maybe you have all of those things in certain of these deals. So, I mean, that's another element of, these transactions. They can take a while to get approvals. There's a lot of paper that needs to be done.
A lot of boxes to check. Yeah.
Well, we see a lot of clients underestimate, how much is required for that. But that's, really just more of the logistics of the transaction. But yeah, I think the large asset sales are kind of the first thing that these companies look at, because, they can really move the needle on paying back debt. The market likes it usually. If they're doing it, they have a reason for doing it, and they can, it's kind of like developing scale. They get bigger bang for their buck if they can offload a really good asset.
Yeah.
Yeah. To add to that, I mean, on large asset sales, you think about it. If the company is selling, if it's like a private equity company selling everything they own, then you may not have as much nuance around the edge of the particular asset. But many times we'll see a company that is maybe developing an asset, maybe in the Permian, maybe in Texas, and they have also developing something in New Mexico. And if they want to exit those separately, from a land professional's perspective, you have to think about what if they're right near the border and there's things that are going to cross over between them. If there's a contract that you're going to need a shared use agreement, those are things that, when we're sitting down for that initial meeting with the company saying, okay, you want to sell, have you thought about X, Y, Z, so that, we can craft the PSA to, address those issues ahead of time. To Austin's point, if there's a lot of state leases, in Texas, maybe not a big issue due to recent, changes in New Mexico. There's maybe some extra steps that you want to anticipate and build into your documents ahead of time. But there's, things are always changing. And so, you hear about something on a deal and there's, okay, next time,
I got to think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's also, I mean, sometimes land professionals, many times they're going to have, the first inkling of something. And so, having them in those meetings ahead of time say, hey, we know,
You can think about
and maybe it's something just about a particular landowner. Hey, we're not going to get this consent. This guy hates us, right?
Yeah.
And so what we need to do something about this so that, when the value falls out because we can't get this, it doesn't blow up the whole deal, right?
Yeah.
And if no one knows that, it's something that we need to have flagged ahead of time.
Yeah, let's kind of dive into that. I think that's interesting. It's the conversations that you have with your land teams as you're preparing for these deals. Let's kind of just walk us through that. I don't know that I've got a structure, but just like what are those conversations? What are the questions you're asking? What are some of the things that would maybe be good information for my counterparts in house to just happen?
It depends on the size of the company, whether we're involved in those conversations or whether that happens internally and that information is presented to us. Smaller companies where the head of land is kind of on the deal team, we're maybe being a little more proactive in asking those questions. On larger deal team, larger companies, right, where there's several layers and divisions of and it's an asset that spans multiple counties. It's just not practical to have all those people in the room.
Yeah.
But having the systems in place and where I've found the transactions, sign and close with the most ease is where there's a very organized land department that, whenever you're producing, hey, we need these exhibits, with the, net acres, NRI figures, APO, BPO figures. Oh yeah. Boop, boop. And it's spit out in no time, where sometimes we run into issues is, yeah, let us go work on putting that together. And it's maybe those files weren't in existence until we asked for them, which, that can, or, we drafted the PSA a certain way for the tile defect mechanic to work in such a way that we're going to defect based off of a DSU. And then the land exhibit that's come up is constructed in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So then we're going back to the drawing board. Okay, do we want to redo the exhibits? Do we want to redo the PSA? Getting ahead of that just saves everyone a lot of time.
Yeah, I think syncing that setup, especially on the title mechanic, up with the way that the seller has represented the asset to the buyer, and in turn the buyer has allocated value and the way that they've been thinking about it. I mean, the agreement and that mechanic are there to complement the assumptions that the parties have made, at an economic level. And I think that, explaining that, I mean, we've had to explain that to land teams that are going in there on the buy side a lot of the time to say, okay, now here's how this PSA works.
Yeah.
You got to do it on a DSU basis. And this is how this, kind of all fits together. Yeah, I think that's a big one for sure.